Hello and welcome to week 2 in Services Marketing. This week we'll be dealing with chapter 2 in our textbook, which is about customer behaviour, culture and service encounters. So the learning objectives for this week are first of all to explain the 3-stage model of service consumption, and looking in that model we'll look at describing the impact of culture upon consumer behaviour within service settings. Number 3, explain the relevance of perceived risk in the information search, which is part of the 3-stage model of service consumption. And number 4, describe why role and script theory and control theory are central to understanding customer behaviour within service settings. Number 5, explain why it's necessary to understand the customer's psychological needs and their values. And last of all, describe the basic mechanism that underpins the formation of post-purchase satisfaction evaluations. So first of all, let's look at understanding customer behaviour. So studies in social psychology, anthropology and marketing have shed considerable light in the recent years on consumer decision-making processes. So most of these models that we use and the theories that we develop from research about consumer behaviour are applicable in a service setting. The inherent social nature of services means that the cultural norms and values impact on consumer behaviour to a large extent. And in looking at that, we've got this simplified model of understanding customer behaviour, which is a 3-stage model. We've got stage 1, which is the pre-purchase impacts, or the pre-purchase stage of making decisions. Stage 2, which is the service encounter, where you actually meet up and the service exchange of value. And then stage 3 is the post-purchase things. So what we're going to do now, we're going to look at this model in a little bit detail, but we're going to start with the outside rings, because all of these stages are impacted by cultural norms and values. So the whole way through is influenced by culture. So let's have a look first about how culture impacts customer behaviour. So culture is the sum of learned beliefs, values and customs that create behavioural norms for a given society. Now normally those societies we analyse at the national level, so we'll say there's an Australian culture, or there's an Indonesian culture, there's an American culture, or there's a Chinese culture, like there's all these cultures around the world. But we can break it down into a little bit more specialised societies or communities, and we often look at these as subcultures. So there's this famous guy called Hofstede, and he's identified 4 underlying dimensions of cultural values. So I've got the journal article which is originally published in down here, the Cultural Consequences, International Differences in Work-Related Values, and these are often called Hofstede's cultural dimensions. So the first one is power distance. Oh, hang on, we'll start here actually. So we've got the table here, but look here. So the first one is individualism versus collectivism. The next one is uncertainty avoidance. The third one is power distance. And then the last one is masculinity versus femininity. Now, we can see here different countries score differently on these different cultural dimensions. So the first one, the power distance on this chart is power distance. So something like Australia is actually quite low, whereas some other countries like Malaysia is really, really high. And we'll have a look at what they mean a little bit more first on the next slide. So here is, it's similar to the previous one, but this actually comes from I think it was originally the Wikipedia page on this. They've put this to explain how it changes across these 4 different countries as well. Now, so let's have a look at what these cultural dimensions are. So we know that they vary a lot through different countries, but let's look at what these cultural dimensions are. So the first one I want to look at is power distance. Now the basic issue with power distance is, does society value equality or inequality in interpersonal interactions? So someone with a lower power distance, their power is relatively equally distributed throughout society. So that means you don't have these people that are seen in society as really powerful and everyone's very respectful of them, and others people that are really lowly and everyone looks down on them. Rather, a lot of people see themselves as more or less the same equal or the same importance within society. And a country that's like that is Australia. We've got that very strong, a very low power distance relationship in Australia. And we don't tend to see our bosses as, the boss, we need to be really respectful for that, because we've got really strong labour laws. If we don't like the boss, we just say goodbye to him, and then we go, or her, whoever it is, and then we go find another boss, or something like that. So it's quite low in Australia, and Australians tend to see themselves all as middle class. So even if you're technically classified as upper class people, although they're technically upper class, they still see themselves as middle class. And lower class people, they might be quite poor and not have a job, might be living on unemployment benefits, all that sort of stuff. So they've got meet all the criteria to be considered lower class, but they still see themselves as middle class as well. And that's what we all do, even when we go through different stages in life. If you're having a rough stage, you'll still see yourself as middle class. If you're wealthy, you'll still see yourself as middle class. So the power-distance relationship is really low in Australia. And it's similar in New Zealand as well. Now, other countries, they have a high power distance, and the hierarchy is strong, and the power is centralised at the top. Now, in these countries, throughout some countries in Asia, if you work somewhere and that's your boss, you do not disagree with your boss, all right? That's your boss, you need to show respect, because they're powerful and you consider yourself not to be. So that there's a big distance between the powerful people and the not powerful people. So that's quite a strong cultural dimension. Now another one is uncertainty avoidance. And this is about what is the attitude towards risk within the society that you're living in, right? So those with low uncertainty avoidance, they have a calculated risk is seen as necessary in order to seize opportunity. And these are countries such as Singapore, Hong Kong, Sweden, and USA, right? Now these ones are actually, it's kind of seen as a good thing for entrepreneurial spirit in business. And we don't really have that much in Australia. So we have more of a high uncertainty avoidance, especially in Tasmania. And risk is regarded as threatening and to be avoided. Now this does sort of tend to be a little bit individualised on people's personalities as well now, as culture sort of diffuse more throughout the world. However, in general, if someone's risking a lot of their wealth or a lot of their position or a lot of their status or power, whatever they consider to be valuable, it's generally frowned upon in Australia, because it's like, well, why would you take such a strong risk with such a little reward? And it's something that we're working on, because what happens then is people might have a really good business idea, a really good opportunity, but because they live in a culture with high risk or high uncertainty avoidance, they don't take these opportunities, because they go, well, I've got a good job where I am and I'm kind of happy and I've got mortgage payments to do, so what's the point of risking it? Alright, so that's uncertainty avoidance. Third one is individualism versus collectivism, and this is, do people rely on themselves or others, like as being part of a group? Now, individualist societies, their self-reliance is valued as the need for the individual to satisfy their own needs within the group. And this is very high in Western cultures, and there's a lot of research that's been published on this, like the individualised culture. And you hear people talk about, oh, you got to look out for yourself, or the number one person. Like when you're making a decision, you got to look out for yourself. The other side of that is collectivist societies, and their dependence is valued as society expects the individual to be subordinate to their own needs to those of the group. So then it's not about what we want as an individual, it's about what's best for the group. That's more common in Asian countries, It's quite strong. I'm not saying which is good and which is bad. I'm just saying this is how it is, and we can make up our own minds. We in a Western society, especially in Australian cultures, we're becoming more individualistic. We're moving away from collectivist societies, and some people have questioned whether that's a good thing or not. Including me. Now, the last one is masculinity and femininity. Now, this is to what extent and at whose expense should the weaker members of society be cared for? Now, feminine cultures, in those societies, caring for others and nurturing roles or attitudes are favoured. So, if someone is a caring and showing these feminine attributes, you go, well, that's a beautiful thing, right? That they're a caring, beautiful person. In masculine societies, personal achievement and assertiveness are favoured. You're like, oh, that's a strong man or woman. They achieve a lot of things. They made themselves, and they're strong and they're confident about what they do. Right? In these countries such as Japan, Switzerland, Great Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. So the masculine and even the image about what you see yourselves as being, or the ideal type of role within society. So do you see in Australia, we deal with this when we study consumer behaviour. So students that have studied that kind of know what I'm talking about. But when you think of an Australian bloke, an Australian man, you know, the images that you come through is that like a strong, dependable person, like with big muscles and a hairy chest, all these types of masculine things. So that varies throughout different cultures. Now, right, so that ends part 1. So I'm going to pause the video here, and we're going to start talking about the rest of the service consumption model in the next video.